Breaking news, friends. October 4th and the military airfields in Crimea, Kacha and Belbek are on fire right now. Explosions. No, there's something going on there.
There's an airfield there. Damn.
I was a bit worried. Most of the tactical aviation has been withdrawn from the area, according to public sources. What's burning here in the center? We're preparing for the deoccupation of the peninsula, according to Sky News. That's the goal of the military operations. Drones attacked the Azot plant in the Perm region and the Orsknefteorgsintez facility in the Orenburg region of Russia. Ukraine may be supplied with long-range Tomahawk and Barracuda missiles, and with this aid, not only frontline targets but also key military objectives deep inside Russia are now within reach. In Moscow and St. Petersburg, get ready for truly large-scale blackouts, fuel shortages, and a harsh winter for the Russians. The cockholes have struck. There's no power here at all. At the same time, attacked oil refineries have already knocked out more than 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity, with losses estimated at $100 billion. Yeah, they fucked up their damn oil. Russia is essentially experiencing an energy and fuel crisis. Let's discuss the details with the well-known military analyst Roman Sviatan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. Wishing everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, let's start with occupied Crimea. First, let's discuss Sky News information that Ukraine's armed forces are preparing brilliant special operations to deoccupy the peninsula. This article came out today. I read it. Immediately, military airfields in Crimea are on fire. Kacha and Belbek were hit. They're writing about this long fuel depot, and drones are also at work. What do you say?
Regarding the deoccupation of Crimea, we ourselves have been saying for several years that the most optimal option for us is to deoccupy, to start the deoccupation of our territory precisely with Crimea. Crimea is an operational geographic cauldron squeezed between two seas, the Azov and the Black Sea. The entry and exit are under our control. If the Kerch Bridge is destroyed, then basically the only way to get into Crimea would be either by sea, which is very problematic, or via land crossings, which are completely under our control. Within a range of about 100 kilometers, we can reach them from both sides. We have the means to reach them. In other words, Crimea itself is practically begging to be deoccupied. And what's most interesting is that this can be done without ground operations, without ground or naval operations, including without an amphibious landing, without losses. We can deoccupy it, destroy, drive out, squeeze out the Russian troops. That is what deoccupation means. With long-range strike capabilities, only they need to be available in sufficient quantity. The aviation component is the main one that is used in this millennium to carry out combat missions. It is precisely what will allow us to drive out the Russian troops, to destroy them, depending on their willingness to die, so to speak. That's why we've been telling the Russians for several years now that they need to learn how to leave Crimea by swimming, by crawling, or doggy style. It's been, about 3 years we've been talking about this, but it's definitely the 4th year now. So now we have this opportunity, and the actions of our special services to eliminate the enemy are underway. This indicates that preparations are being made for a serious offensive operation. And it's roughly the kind that doesn't involve geopolitics. Politics, it's purely a technical matter. Just like Mossad, or rather the Israeli IDF struck Iran. Once again, I'm saying, without geopolitics, purely as a technical operation. They cleared out Iran's air defenses, and after that from 1,000 kilometers away, while for us it's only 300. Their aircraft had to refuel for 1,000 kilometers. We don't need to refuel. Their aircraft entered Iranian territory just as we can enter the airspace of Crimea, and then use free-falling precision-guided bombs and guided missiles to take out ground targets. Just as it was done, for example, against Iranian military targets after entering their airspace 1,000 kilometers from the airbase. So it's basically a one-to-one operation. There's nothing new to invent. Everything was thought up 100 years ago, but for aviation. So this kind of mechanism is possible for the deoccupation of Crimea specifically. Iran is still mainly a land-based country, and besides, it doesn't share a border with Israel. That's why there was no ground operation, but in principle it wasn't needed. We have the same situation, but for us it's much simpler. Russia will have to run. Once again, I repeat, Greater Crimea is an operational and geographical cauldron. They will have to run there or simply perish. Everything will depend on the amount of strike assets. Today we struck at Belbek and Kacha. These are Western airfields. The Russians have 5 such airfields that they use in Crimea. 5. 2 of them have already been hit more than once. Why exactly these airfields, these airfield sites? Russia does not use them for deploying surface-to-air missile systems or radar units of the radio-technical troops. In other words, the eyes of Russian air defense begin, roughly speaking, the first eye is Kacha. The last eye is the Kerch Bridge, meaning they are stretched out along the line. That's roughly how it is. That's why there are strikes on Kacha, on Belbek, and on the adjacent airfields. This is the beginning of gaining air superiority, which will now be carried out by our special services, special operations forces, and unmanned systems forces. In other words, the defense forces near Crimea. When there is an actual air attack on Crimea, it will have to involve missiles, that is, missiles with sufficient range. Our Neptune works very well, it's not just long range. Yes, Neptune has a range of 280 kilometers. It reaches at least to the middle of Crimea, depending on the launch point, in fact, almost to Kerch. This is the basic Neptune, as it's called, of which we have a sufficient number in our coastal missile systems. This is our missile, which has been in service for more than a year. Since 2018, it has been performing combat missions. The long-range Neptune can potentially go even farther, up to 1,000 kilometers towards Kamchatka. That's if that direction is chosen for a strike. And then there's the aviation component. We already have a 2nd brigade receiving F-16S. 2 brigades of F-16S are enough to carry out a military operation, an air operation, I mean, using aerial strike assets, missile and bomb attacks without ground or naval operations. So we'll wait, meaning as the planes arrive, as they come in together with the aircraft, since it's all a platform after all. You need a sufficient amount of weaponry to carry out this kind of attack. So as soon as we're ready, the main thing is that the Russians are ready. I'll say it again. Freestyle, breaststroke, doggy paddle.
Roman Lvovich, well, for some reason, Sky News wrote that before winter, Ukraine might launch a large-scale attack on Crimea. This could be a quote, like a naval landing by the Ukrainian armed forces, as well as a massive attack on the Kerch Bridge. What do you think?
Well, I would argue about the naval part, because a naval landing is realistically possible in 3 locations in order to accomplish a specific task based on the capabilities we have. That's not Crimea, that's the Kerch. Sorry, that's the Kinburn Spit, the Tendrov Spit, and Skadovsk, the port of Skadovsk. But all of this is still the coastline of southern Ukraine on the Black Sea. In other words, it's the mainland coast, basically the left bank of the Dnipro. Basically, in an amphibious landing, the objective of any landing operation, not just amphibious, but also airborne or ground landings, is to seize, that is, to make a rapid advance by various means, capture and hold a certain bridgehead until the main forces arrive. As for Crimea, if you were to launch an amphibious landing there, that would be sheer madness. No one is definitely going to do that, because ground forces simply won't be able to approach, since it would still take another 6 months to a year of working on Crimea with airstrikes. But for example, the Kinburn Spit, the Tendrov Spit, and Skadovsk, this is a port, by the way, just 50 kilometers from Crimea. So to capture it, that is to carry out the combat mission of an amphibious landing, say, in the port of Skadovsk, and hold it until the main forces arrive, which, for instance, could cross the Dnipro from Kherson at Neoleshki, basically along a straight road. There's a direct road through Holopristan leading to Skadovsk. They would cut off this triangle almost along the left bank of the Dnipro, and it would be possible to hold it. So in this kind of scenario, yes, it's a direction toward Crimea, but it's not actually Crimea itself. That's why our partners, the journalists, were a bit hasty, to put it mildly, when talking about an amphibious landing. As for the Kerch Bridge, its liberation needs to begin. Why the Kerch Bridge? Because it's exactly that logistical chain through which 30% of military munitions and equipment pass via Crimea, specifically to the Kherson-Zaporizhia front. Obviously, that's what we need to take out first. It's difficult to do. Why? Because there's a very layered and uneven defense system there. Almost all our missiles, all our efforts are being countered. It needs to be taken down with ballistic missiles. There have to be enough Hrom missiles, several dozen, whether it's Hrom 1 or Hrom 2, it doesn't matter, depending on the range. 300 kilometers, that's possible. Only this way can we break through the Russian supply line, specifically over Moscow, over the Kerch Bridge. The Kerch Bridge.
Roman Lvovich, when we talk about the military airfields Kacha and Belbek, is there currently enemy tactical aviation stationed there? In what numbers? Because you and I don't know, we discuss strikes on Kacha and Belbek almost twice a month. This happens regularly.
Those two airfields are used as forward operating bases, meaning they host tactical aviation, mainly the Russian Federation's naval aviation, and there are always Army aviation helicopters stationed there. These helicopters are used to counter our surface and aerial drones. In other words, the helicopters can operate up to 1 kilometer in altitude. By the way, this is actually the only, well, not the only, but one of the main means of destruction that the Russian Federation uses against our drones, including aerial drones. Helicopters, they simply have a lot of them, and the entire range of their helicopter fleet is Army aviation. And so at forward airfields like Belbek, and even more so at Kacha, that's where they are stationed. They have reloading and refueling points there. It's a whole process. They're not the main ones, but as forward airfields, they fulfill their role.
Roman Grigorievich, now regarding the strikes on oil refineries and others. We attacked the Azot plant in Perm Krai, Orsknefteorgsintez in the Orenburg region. What do you think?
Now we know where the Russian orcs are from. Orsk, yes, from there. Our specialists have highlighted it. That's where the orc lair is, in Orsk, yes, somewhere around there. But seriously, of course, we've talked about this with you before, and in principle, our listeners should be prepared for this. The next stage in destroying the Russian economy is through the destruction of Russia's chemical industry. That is to say, the oil and gas sector is certainly one significant thing, but almost all of Russia's extensive chemical industry, which predominantly uses natural gas, is intrinsically tied to the broader oil and gas sector. So the pertinent question is, why are they now specifically targeting chemical production facilities? Let's say, even if our drones fly 1,500 kilometers, the main task, first of all, is to try to completely destroy this plant. There is such a possibility. For example, the plant that was hit, the Perm plant, not only produced ammonia and so on, but it also produced ammonium nitrate. Ammonium nitrate is used in the production of explosives and in large quantities. For us, it's very important to take the chemical industry out of this equation to prevent Russian, let's say, powder plants from producing explosives. Moreover, ammonium nitrate itself is highly explosive. If anyone remembers, a few years ago in Lebanon, in Beirut, there was an explosion of ammonium nitrate, Russian, by the way. A Russian ship had docked there at the time, either standing or unloading, and then suddenly it exploded, as they say. So this kind of sudden explosion can be organized at any chemical plant that produces ammonium nitrate. So the Omsk plant produced it, but the Orsk plant is, after all, you could say, an oil refinery. Mainly it produces gasoline, diesel, and aviation kerosene. This Orsk plant is very important to us. And the next one after it, if you go further east, about 3,000 kilometers, is the Orsk plant, the refinery that is the oil refinery. This is the Orsk one, from where Orsk, that's Orsk. Further on below Kazakhstan, yes, that's Omsk. So in Omsk, there is an oil refinery, the largest in Russia, with an annual processing capacity of 21 million tons. That means it's serious money, and it's essential to reach it and stop this oil refining. Yes, they do process some Kazakh oil there, but still the money comes from the refining, so it's necessary to get to it. Well, if they've already reached Orsk, I think they'll make it to Omsk too.
According to dry statistics, analysts write that the refineries that have been attacked have already put more than 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity out of commission, and losses are estimated at over 100 billion. But when I talk to economists, they look at me and say, Putin doesn't care. The population can stand in line for gasoline. The queues can be enormous. There can be a fuel and energy crisis. They'll get through it. It won't affect Russia's ability to conduct military operations against Ukraine in any way. Roman Lvovich, I'd like to discuss this with you.
Well, putting pressure on Russian civil society definitely won't have any effect, and Putin really doesn't care. But our goal isn't to put pressure on Russian society. As we've discussed many times before, that's a side effect, so to speak. A side effect of what? Of the fact that the main part of the fuel, which is still produced at other plants, is going to the army. So to put it simply, just to understand the process, if a tank crewman is competing with a tractor driver for diesel, the tank crewman will win. Guess why? You have three tries. The tank crewman has a gun on his tank, while the tractor driver at best has nothing in his pocket. So naturally, the tractor drivers are left without fuel, and the tank crews carry out their combat missions. Putin knows this perfectly well. So, I mean, and he doesn't pay any attention. Well, not just Putin, the entire Russian military leadership They absolutely don't care how Russian civilians are supposed to get around. That's just a side effect. It's like turning a gas station into a parking lot into an impound lot. In other words, all civilian cars will come to a halt, but that won't affect the military at all. To actually impact the army's fuel supplies, you would have to destroy the entire oil refining industry in Russia, not just 40%, but all of it, plus cut off the flow of foreign currency. That's why we keep striking the chemical industry as well. As we discussed before, expect more strikes on the chemical industry. Here are those strikes on the chemical industry. Let's make a prediction. The next strikes will target metallurgy in Russia's energy sector. Your next step is precisely the destruction of metallurgy, which brings a significant amount of revenue to the Russian treasury. And naturally, the energy sector, which powers the Russian Federation's military industry. There will definitely be strikes, 100%. This is already the third stage. In order to prevent the Russian army from being supplied with fuel, it means the entire oil and gas sector of Russia needs to be brought down. You need to cut off the natural flow of these currencies and petrodollars as well, so that they can't buy, like they're already starting to do now, diesel and gasoline abroad, buying from the Chinese, from the Indians, trying to purchase already refined products made from someone else's oil, basically to bring it back. So the Russian army must be completely stopped. The Russian economy must be completely zeroed out, so that they have nothing left to even buy this gasoline and diesel. After that, they'll have to switch, as we've already said, to donkeys, those who bray and bleat now but don't want to go to war. The donkeys go, but the little donkeys don't. By donkeys, I mean those in the Russian Federation, but the little donkeys are done for. Right now, a little donkey costs more than a motorcycle. That's why Russian bloggers and public pages are practically flooded with offers to buy motorcycles for Russian soldiers. That's about how much it costs, a bottle of water and a motorcycle, especially in Donbass where there's no water at all. You can't even tell what they're pouring into those bottles there. That's why this process is happening. And to stop it completely, to stop the Russian army, you need to cut off these two flows. That is the flow of fuel production and the flow of currency. Without stopping the flow of foreign currency, it will be very difficult to stop the army.
Dear viewers, please like this video and support our content with Roman Grigorievich. Every like from you is invaluable, and in the comments, let us know where you're watching from. Share your location with us. Roman Grigorievich, you see, President Zelensky, I think it was the day before yesterday, said that until now we have attacked Russia exclusively with Ukrainian-made weapons, Ukrainian arms, but now the situation may change, Zelensky said. And here, two pieces of news have emerged. First, the United States is providing Ukraine with intelligence for missile strikes deep inside Russia. These are oil refineries, pipelines, power plants, and other facilities, including those in Moscow and St. Petersburg. This is the first time that the Trump administration will be helping Ukraine carry out strikes using long-range missiles on targets deep within Russian territory. And the second piece of information is that the possibility of supplying Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk and Barracuda missiles is currently being considered. Roman Grigorievich, how would you comment on this?
There are Russian power plants, pumping stations, and pipelines. We know very well that they are all still from the Soviet Union. It is very important for us to have the locations of Russian assets available to us in real time online so that we can share this information. For our drones to reach their targets, the drone flies, let's put it simply, how long did it take the drone to reach Orsk? About 1.5 to more than 1,500 kilometers at a speed of 150 kilometers per hour. That's 10 hours. In those 10 hours, it could be shot down 300 times. And it needs to have a flight route that avoids all the engagement zones, all the areas covered by Russian air defenses, which in principle are not that many anymore. If the drone has passed the front line, but you need to know exactly and specifically which air defense system covers which altitude, where the beam starts, how to bypass it, at what speeds, at what altitudes to fly under the beam, that is below the radio horizon. It's a whole process. And without intelligence data of this level, and the Americans see all of this, they have everything from radio reconnaissance to satellite monitoring. They can see perfectly well where each Russian station is turned on, how far its range is, and so on and so forth. And this data gives us the opportunity, even for our weapons, to get through and complete the combat mission. But we've already talked about this in the film, meaning they've managed to get it. Now, as for the question about missiles, well, I don't believe they'll give us Ataki-MS, and I don't believe it for one simple reason. If they were ready to give us Ataki-MS, they would have already given us JAS-SM for the F-16s we already have. or the accordions for the HIMARS we have. So it's more of a topic for discussion. Technically, it's possible. It's not that it's impossible. But this is really a sea-launched missile, a naval launch at this stage already. But a few years ago, a program was launched to restore ground-based launches, the so-called mobile ones. A sufficient number of launches have already been created, Typhoon or Typhon, as they're also called, depending on the translation. Typhoon, Typhon. These launches make it possible to fire, that is to launch a Tomahawk missile from this installation. It's the same, basically it's the same launch silo as the Mk-41 shipborne launcher. They just removed it and mounted it on a vehicle chassis, and from there it can carry out its combat mission. But let me repeat myself, why don't I believe it at this stage? Why? Because we've already been promised JASSM. We already have a second F-16 brigade, but not a single JASSM has arrived. By the way, even fewer cruise missiles have been delivered. This issue could have been resolved, but they're afraid. So if they're afraid to give us JASSM, do you really think they'll give us Azot? But something like the Barracuda, for example, well, that's not quite the same. It's more like a drone missile. And you're talking about, yes, I'm talking about the Barracuda. So the Tomahawk is still a cruise missile, a medium range one, and its range is about 2,000 kilometers, give or take 500, depending on the type. And the Barracuda has a range of 500 kilometers, but nevertheless, it can carry a 500 kilogram warhead. So basically, it's a short range missile, you could say. The Barracuda is roughly comparable to the Taurus. Only the Taurus costs millions of euros, while the Barracuda is a few $100,000. It's simpler, yes, it's easy to produce, meaning it can be made in large quantities, like our Pollyanna, for example, or the same Flamingo. But in reality, we only have some videos, teasers, that's all we've seen. But in fact, let's say the Barracuda is just now entering production, and in half a year we might get it. But we won't get it tomorrow. It's only just starting to be produced. We'll probably get the ERAMs faster. That is, there's a missile that they basically already started producing for us, and we can get them sooner. Because we're waiting, of course, for the weapons we've ordered. But it's much simpler. I've already explained this in simple terms to give us what we already have, the launches. We have HIMARS. We have about 50 HIMARS ATACMS. Please, a 300-kilometer missile could already be in use. We have F-16S, already several squadrons that are carrying out combat missions. But what level of combat missions are they? With fly swatters, they're chasing flies. In other words, with cannons, roughly speaking, against Shaheds or against Iran drones. So if they were given the opportunity, at least 100 JASSMs to work at range, 500 kilometers, the same 500 kilometers, the same 500 kilograms warhead, and Moscow would be gone. They talk about some blackout. Imagine what a blackout in Moscow would be like. Blackout in Kyiv, nothing terrible. A blackout in Kyiv. Why is it nothing terrible? First of all, the population density isn't the same anymore. Some people have left. Secondly, we've already gotten used to it. We're ready. We know how to deal with these issues. Life and support, but still Kyiv has several times fewer people than Moscow. Imagine tens of millions. No one even knows how many mouths there are in Moscow. Now imagine how many behinds there are in Moscow. If all of them go to the bathroom at the same time in a day, and there's no water, no electricity, there, to put it mildly, there will be such a stench of Russian spirit that it will seriously reek within a radius of about 1,500 kilometers. It'll reach us. Well, it'll definitely reach the Urals. In other words, it would just be a humanitarian catastrophe, and a very serious one at that. By the way, one way to kill off all the combat mosquitoes, they'll just die from that Russian stench. There will be a problem there, and that possibility exists. If we had been given those JASSMs, even just 100 of them, that Russian stench would have reached the Urals.
Roman Grigorievich, when Zelensky says that previously we only used Ukrainian long-range strike systems, but now that's no longer the case, I'm curious, what is he talking about? What long-range missiles is he referring to? It's European. What is President Zelensky talking about? So what could fly deep into Russian territory that isn't Ukrainian?
Well, what is he talking about? This is a question that millions of people have been asking for years, at least Ukrainians. So it's very hard for me to, so to speak, decipher it. But realistically, from what we might have at this stage, I've basically already mentioned it. We have a platform. So what can fly quickly? Yes, TACMs can. Those who have already flown 300 kilometers. What is 300 kilometers? Look, a 300-kilometer ATACMS will reach it to Kursk, to Bryansk, to Voronezh, to Belgorod, to Rostov. These are 5 regional cities along the border, that is cross-border cities. And that's not even mentioning Crimea. I'm talking about Russian cities. So that's just what ATACMS can reach. If we get the PRSM, by the way, the Americans are now switching to the PRSM. It's the same launcher for the HIMARS, only there are 2 missiles in the block instead of 1 ATAC-MS. It has a range of 500 kilometers, enough to reach Moscow. So how do you create a blackout in Moscow? It's very simple. About 100 PRSMs, and there will definitely be a blackout. And that's not even mentioning the JASSMs, the Verneswits, the JASSMs that could be dropped from those same F-16s. So that's what could really help us, of course, not to mention the Scalps, the Storm Shadow, or, for example, the Taurus. There's a lot that can be said about the Taurus missiles. The question now is, well, let's say Taurus, none of our planes can carry them yet. The F-16 can't carry them either, but the Gripen can. So not ruling out the possibility that if Gripens arrive, even just a pair of planes, and usually they deliver them in groups of 4, then we could get Taurus missiles as well. That's also a range of 500 kilometers, which means it can reach Moscow as well. So we wait, and maybe later we'll understand what our great leaders are talking about.
As you always say about the Moscow bathhouse. Hello? Roman Igorovich, let's talk about drones on the territory of the European Union and NATO countries. So, 15 drones were detected for the first time at night in Belgium over a military base. Airports were shut down. Then drones appeared in Munich. Everyone was in shock. Civil aviation and airports temporarily suspended their operations. The carpet plan was enacted. Then at Valdai, Putin is asked, well, as they say, Vladimir Vladimirovich, how long are you going to keep launching drones? He says there will be many of them, but you understand it's not us, it's just some guys messing around over there. And in this way, essentially, Putin announced that a huge number of drones would be roaming the skies of the North Atlantic Alliance countries. Roman Lvovich, what does this indicate from a military standpoint?
Well, on the coast, for example, there is probably also some pressure being applied. It's more economic, for instance. Why? Because Belgium holds the main Nabulina reserves, right? Those securities that she placed there, it's about 200 billion euros. Our person specifically, we've already talked about Nabulina. What kind of Tatar is she? She's a pure-blooded Ukrainian. How much did she have to help us like that? That's one thing. So most likely that's one of the reasons why they're flying over Belgium. The military reason among them. There's a base in Belgium where American nuclear weapons are stationed. Among NATO countries, there are a few that have their own nuclear weapons. Those are France, Britain, and the United States. And American nuclear weapons, about 150 nuclear warheads, are also stationed in 5 other countries. In Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and Turkey. And so naturally, there's a base in Belgium, and that's why the Russians, of course, will now be trying at the very least to somehow find ways to approach these bases as well. The flights of these drones are not so harmless at all. This isn't just a provocation. These are combat missions, the fulfillment of combat tasks. What do the drones do? They create what's called a digital map of the area, approaching specific targets and starting to photograph them, converting the images into digital format, which can then be uploaded into the missile, into its brain, into the missile's onboard memory. Who here has heard of onboard memory? So these are exactly the photographs that are first taken by those same drones, then uploaded, and when the missile is on the terminal phase of its trajectory, as it approaches the target, and electronic warfare systems try, for example, to disrupt its control and satellite connection. The thing is, it no longer needs a satellite connection if it has machine vision. In other words, it's a bunch of photographs that simply guide it to the target. But these photos need to be taken. They need to be taken from the air, from specific angles. What are these drones doing? Because to be honest, I don't understand why they aren't being shot down. This is preparation for serious strikes, for specific attacks, using the means of destruction that the Russians have. Well, if we have them, like Neptune, just so you know, this information is actually publicly available. And it also locks onto the target using exactly this kind of machine vision. Why is it that electronic warfare systems practically don't affect it? Well done, KB Lucinates. And here, even before that, why, for example, fight against fish? What's the point if you can just disconnect from the satellite and carry out the combat mission in this way? It's just a different approach, different frequencies. Long waves are used, a different set of these digital photos. But nevertheless, that's roughly the idea. That's why Europeans shoot down all foreign objects, especially over military facilities. Otherwise, you'll get such a buzzing later that you won't know what hit you.
Friends, please like this video and let us know in the comments if the kitty has sent support to our tandem. Roman Grigorievich and I meet 3 times a week to discuss key military and political topics. Roman Grigorievich is our military analyst, sometimes a psychologist, sometimes a psychiatrist when he evaluates the actions of the Rushists and Putin, but we always provide clear analysis. The well-known military analyst Roman Igorovich, thank you very much. And as usual, see you again on Monday.
Goodbye.